Pretty much everything that I understand about Japanese culture comes from cinema, whether it be from Kurosawa's Seven Samurai or Martin Scorsese's Silence. And every time I watch a Japanese-centric movie, it doesn't help me understand their culture any better at all. And Rental Family is no exception. So the brand new Searchlight Pictures, Brendan Fraser led movie Rental Family, I just came out of watching it in the theaters. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't particularly impressed by it, but it did have a richness and a magnificence to it that did take me by surprise. So first off, I just wanted to talk about kind of the movie-making elements, so the visuals and the sound and just kind of how those two things worked together. Now, from a visual perspective, I really liked how the colors, it brought out sort of the blues and the grays of the city, right? It's that sort of like slate tones that you would see in an actual city. I believe it takes place in Tokyo, right, in Japan. It's a city look. So it's not this like bright, vibrant 35mm look that you might expect from like an indie movie. It has like a groundedness and a reality to it that is pleasing to the eyes, but it's not, it almost feels corporate. You know, it looks like those corporate stock footage videos because it takes place in a corporate environment. Even so, it does have some really nice camera work, and when we get into the lush forests of Japan, you have these really deep greens, and of course I'm always happy when people actually know how to use shadows and light, unlike Wicked or some of those new movies where you actually have some black in the shadows, where you have this contrast and such. So it looked great. It was a well done picture, and I really liked the use of landscape shots. So this film has a lot of aerial landscape shots, which are super cool. You know, you get lots of sweeping shots of the city, of when characters are driving across the countryside. A lot of really, really zoomed out landscape footage, which is amazing because Japan has an awesome landscape. And so Hikari did a great job of really utilizing that and showing us what a beautiful country it is. And there were some really cool CGI visual effects shots, like of people in windows and stuff, that were just really cool. And there were just moments that were like, okay, yeah, this is really cool. This is a breathtaking shot. And when it comes to the sound, this is what I thought was really interesting. The music in the film almost never stops. And there were moments here where I was like, okay, I feel like we could use a moment of silence. Good directors, good filmmakers know how to use silence well. And I'm not saying that this film didn't use silence, because there were definitely moments that didn't have any music, but there is music going throughout almost the entire film. And that's sort of a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing about it is that you get a little bit less of those moments of silence that can make certain things more dramatic, and just having silence, throughout a film can be really, really helpful. Again, not that it didn't have any silence, but perhaps it could have used more. But the good thing about it is that it flows like a symphony. The movie feels like one big song. It's very symphonic. And that's where I think the director did this on purpose. There's so much music because the entire movie is meant to flow from scene to scene in one seamless song. And it does do a really good job of that. So I thought that was really cool. The soundscape that's created here doesn't rely so much on ambience and the noise of people, but more on the music. And using that music as an undertone throughout the entire story does make certain moments work a lot better. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is just kind of the culture that's displayed here and the philosophy of the film. Now, again, it is a Japanese-centric film, so it deals a lot with elements of Japanese culture, which I find endlessly fascinating. Again, it doesn't really make much sense to me afterwards because there's just so many elements of how these people operate that I'm never going to understand as an American. However, Brendan Fraser offers us a perfect audience surrogate, being someone who lives in Japan but is an American and has to, even after having lived there for 7 years, he has to deal with, the ways that this culture operates. There's a little bit of story here, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but we'll talk about it briefly. Essentially, he has sort of encounters with religion with certain characters that are very religious, and he's learning a lot more about Japanese culture. And there's some really, really interesting elements here where this old man tells him that the concept of the gods that the Japanese people worship are centered around the people that worship them. Essentially, he says God exists in the sun, in the land, in the plants, in the animals, and he even exists in us. And the idea of God being within every human being, well, it's something that, is dealt with in these religions that aren't something that I ascribe to. It is still a fundamentally true idea, the idea that God is within every human being, and I think that that's just a really, really cool concept. Another element of the culture that's touched on here is just kind of the mental health crisis that's going on, and the whole story revolves around this, rental family agency where they're able to rent out actors to people so that they can portray different people in their lives so that they feel more fulfilled in areas where they have failed. Now, obviously, this is a really weird, faulty sort of philosophy philosophy to have, and that is something that the movie takes a stance on, sort of. And again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but that's one of the things that left me a little confused. We don't really understand where the film stands on whether or not it's okay to have actors portraying people and sort of messing with their lives, which is a little bit confusing by the end of the film. Something that did rub me the wrong way, being someone who ascribes to traditional Christian values, was taking the philosophy of, using this rental family agency to help certain people sort of rebel against societal norms a little bit too far, in that essentially they have our main character stage a marriage with a young woman so that she can kind of convince her parents that she's been married to a man, and then she can go and secretly be married to a woman. And just this sort of subplot was just very strange to me, and it's definitely not something that I morally agree with, again, being someone who's a traditional Christian. And that kind of leads me to the final thing about the philosophy, which is just there's sort of this tonal dissonance going on, because there's actually this quote that I wrote down that I thought was really good at the beginning, where one of the characters says to Brendan Fraser's character, "Sometimes all we need is for someone to look us in the eye and remind us that we exist." That's sort of her argument for why the rental family agency is a good idea, because even though they're faking, they're still creating actual human connection with people. And that's something that by the end of the film kind of won me over, because we see throughout the story that although these are actors that are faking, they still do make real friendships and real connections with these people. And so there has to be something there. Human connection can't be denied by the fact that someone might be lying. Lying about it doesn't change the fact that these interactions actually did happen. And so I found that to be very encouraging. However, throughout the film, again, we don't get a full stance on whether or not that's okay, because at the beginning with this strange lesbian situation, it's sort of showed that the rental family agency did a good thing and that they helped this young woman, but then by the end they kind of say that this isn't actually good, and they change their entire business structure. And so it's just a little bit of tonal dissonance on whether or not that's actually something that the film thinks is a good thing. The final note that I wanted to touch on is just the acting. Brendan Fraser is not an actor that I have necessarily considered to be amazing in what I've seen of his. Actually, the only other thing I've seen that he's done is Journey to the Center of the Earth from 2008, which is an atrocity, to put it kindly. So my perspective on his acting abilities was perhaps not realistic. However, in this film, he did a phenomenal job. There's just something about, he's just such a lovable character. Perhaps this is just how he is in actual life, but the way that he acts so well with his face. There's so much face acting going on here, and it's just, I love it. It's very believable, and more than that, it feels real, and it feels emotional, and it made me feel. So that's kind of the final thing that I really loved about the film. So yeah. Overall, I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5 or a 7 out of 10. So again, not the best thing I've seen, but it was a symphonic, lyrical, beautiful film overall. Again, there were things that I didn't agree with, and there were things that weren't perhaps done very well. But overall, it did have a beautiful emotional feel and some fundamental truths baked into it. And for that, I thought it was a pretty good film. I never know how to end these, man. It's just like, oh, I thought it was a pretty good film. Anyway, see you in the next one.